So,
That's
as
the
always, we
point.
begin
Sorry.
by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. My name is Siu Mee Cheng, and I'm the executive director of Street Haven. Street Haven is a not-for-profit women's service agency that provides multiple services, primarily targeting homeless and vulnerable and women living in deep poverty. Our agency has been around since 1965. Even though we are award-winning, we actually have very strong grassroots beginning, wherein our founder, who is actually an emergency room nurse, she actually had noted that a lot of very vulnerable and at-risk women, primarily sex workers at the time back in the 1960s, were often being ignored by the hospital and the broader healthcare and welfare system. And so she created the first 24-hour drop-in center for the agency. And then 3 years later, she created Canada's first women's shelter. And fast forward 55 years later, we now provide a series of services, including shelters, supportive housing, addictions treatment programming, as well as outreach services and mental health addictions, eviction prevention training, and employment support. So that's my agency.
Awesome. Well, we thank you so much for the service that you do. Thank you. And could you articulate your personal mission and vision for us? And also, I'd like to tie in like what inspires you about the work you do as well.
Sure. My personal vision and mission, I think really what drives me are my own values around really feeling compelled to help those who are looking for help, those who perhaps are not as fortunate as myself, or those who are being disadvantaged primarily by structural and systemic discrimination. And those who have been unable to control the circumstances that they find themselves in. And I do feel like it's my duty, and I think everyone has a duty to frankly help others who are less fortunate and who are experiencing challenges that are beyond their ability to help themselves. And that's really kind of the value that kind of drives me, and why what my vision and what my own mission is when it comes to the work that I do and the work that I like to find myself doing. Can you repeat the second question again? Sorry.
Yeah, like just what inspires you?
Yeah, I think what inspires me, especially right now in the workplace that I'm in, is that really two things. I get really inspired when I see our clients, and our clients are, as I mentioned earlier, women who are homeless, who are living in deep poverty, who've experienced significant challenges, unfortunately, including gender-based violence. And I really like seeing that they're able to, through the supports that we're able to provide them and through their own interests and motivations, move on towards greater independence and really become a thriving member of their community and achieving their own personal goals. We've had several clients who've came to us pretty much homeless without a dollar in their pocket, arrive in our shelter programs, and then fast forward a year and a bit later, they're living on their own now, working at really great employment opportunities, going back to school, and looking forward to their future. And that's really inspiring to me. It kind of shows you, despite the structural challenges that women are facing today, that individual agencies and individuals are able to make a difference in the lives of women in need. I think another thing that really inspires me is that I really am very touched and astounded by the fact that staff who work in this sector really go above and beyond, just the job description that they're hired for. They really go the extra mile to help the woman. They really care about them. There's really compassion that's driving why they're doing what they're doing, so that women can keep moving forward in their own pathway towards greater success. And that's also very inspiring.
Definitely. Totally. Like hearing the passion from your voice, I see, definitely something that is so needed. And, oftentimes a lot of these women, they have children, and, children are very impressionable. They see, and we don't want the same outcome to happen in their generation. So people like you are really making the difference for them. We thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you. I will not take all the credit. The agency has been doing amazing work for decades, but and the frontline workers who are there doing, the groundwork are making a huge impact. And I think the comment about, you know, many of our women are also parents and mothers, and unfortunately, because of the challenges they've experienced, whether it's addictions or other issues, they have been separated from their family. And the impact and trauma, that, as we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's like the women has experienced trauma, now their children have experienced trauma from being separated from their parent, and everything else. And so it's really kind of heartening when you hear stories about women who've been able, for instance, to move beyond their pathway towards recovery, their addictions pathway towards recovery. And one of their own personal goals above and beyond the recovery is really family reunification, just being, connected to their family again, and to have their children consider them as mothers and, as someone close to them is really touching. It's like it's a contribution you're not only making to individuals, but actually to communities, right? Because
Right.
if you're allowing families to thrive, then you're actually contributing to communities thriving.
Absolutely. 100%. So what challenges or barriers have you faced in your work, and how were you able to overcome them?
Yeah, it's kind of like two, I would bucket it under two big things. I think one of the big challenges is that non-for-profit agencies, and I'm sure you've heard this through a lot of your other interviews, we're just being faced with significant austerity pressures, right? Like government keeps talking about cutting back on expenses, being more lean and efficient, and running things more smoother, and going out and finding your own fundraising dollars to counterbalance the underfunding that government has been, allocating funds to. And you're trying to operate publicly funded programs that are frankly saving lives. Like we are running shelters and addictions treatment programs that are literally saving lives without exaggeration. And meanwhile, we're being asked to go fundraise. And I just think, I don't know that hospital executives would necessarily agree to go fundraise for an emergency room nurse, right? Like for emergency room. So, but it seems okay to do that on the social services side and on treatment side. I don't understand that. And that is one big challenge, is these big policies, big public policies that exist, that really, frankly, are marginalizing women in need. Like if you marginalize a women's agency, then you're marginalizing the women that they serve. And that's exactly what's happening at all levels of government. And there's a level of just, I've just reached a point of, you know, intolerance, I have to admit, for some of these policies. I don't understand it. I cannot understand why there isn't this collective sense of urgency and wanting to lift women out of the conditions they're in, because it's really not acceptable or tolerable. I think the other challenge is that, and this is where the ratcheting of the issues become even worse, is the women are now presenting with more and more complex needs and issues, right? They're coming to us homeless, shelterless, living in deep poverty, having complex healthcare and mental health challenges, including trauma, and then on top of that, they have no family networks or social networks because of their history, their conditions, the things that they've experienced. And meanwhile, we're being asked by governments to meet all these needs with the existing funding that hasn't changed, or changed barely minimally, hasn't even kept up with inflation. That is our biggest challenge, is like, how do we balance needing to now be more adaptable, more flexible, more responsive to these emerging and evolving needs? Like, for instance, the refugee crisis, and I mean that the crisis of homeless women living on the streets without supports, shelter, and funding, arriving at our doors. How do we meet these complex needs, and then at the same time not being given additional supports from government, who has a responsibility towards these individuals? That is our biggest challenge. It is systemic and structural.
100%. It seems to be a tightening up as they say, and but the tightening in places that need it the most just does not add up. And I totally agree with your level of frustration. It does seem like on a social aspect, yes, coming together and collaborating like this is so essential because while the big higher ups are tightening up, we have to now open up our hearts, open up our minds, and say we need to collectively come together as humanity because we cannot let this continue. We all came from a woman, and a woman came from, and on it goes, right? We wouldn't be here, right?
It
We didn't
wouldn't be
go through.
here. We all wouldn't be here if there weren't women around us. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable how women's services and the women's sector is being ignored and under supported by government.
Hmm.
And I think that a level of public consciousness is now required. It almost feels like, oh well, we we did all our work back in the 60s and 70s. So now everything's a-okay. But actually, no, for women who are not in that mainstream in terms of having a job, having a house, living hopefully a reasonably acceptable life, they're being left behind. They're being left so far behind. And it's become now like a social justice issue. It's like 50% of the population is not as well off as we like to think we are. And the women who are of that 50% who are far behind are really far, far behind. And they may never catch up if we keep with, the current policies and the funding levels and the absence of adequate levels of support. And it's very worrying. We should all worry about it, right? Because it's a collective responsibility we all have towards society. We don't want to see women in encampments. It's not safe for them. We don't want to see people living and aging, women aging in shelters and encampments. That's not a good sign of society either. But these are things I've
Absolutely.
seen. Right? You don't
Yeah.
want to see people
Yeah.
dying homeless. And these are things I've seen. I mean, how did we get
Uh,
to this point? And I think that, this is a conversation about social justice.
absolutely. There's so many different ones. It's you can't even count, you
You
know.
can't count. You can't even keep up. It's like it's
Mhm.
mind bending.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would be like your set of priorities? Let's say, if you were to put it on the table in front of governments, like what would be the priorities in that aspect? I'm coming to you kind of in that angle because that is just you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
is so precedent right now. Like, let's say you're in front of them, what would be the priority to get the job done and get yeah, where we need to be?
Yeah, I mean, for my agency, we've been advocating almost and relentlessly um, about needing to ensure that you carve off targeted funding for women's only services right now. And I think that's really important. I don't mean co-ed services. I mean women's only services because there are services for women. Many of our clients have experienced significant trauma, and the places that they feel most secure and safest and comfortable at are going to be services that are directed for women only or people who identify as women. And so, one big thing that we want to achieve is being able to develop significantly more affordable housing, supportive care housing for women only in our agency. And that leads to a broader conversation about governments needing to dedicate strategies and policies that invest targeted funding for women's services only. And that's at the local, the provincial, and national levels. So we're looking at housing, we're looking at addictions treatment programming, we're looking at mental health supports, we're looking at counseling and trauma supports, we're looking at primary care. These are the things that we're concerned about, that my colleagues who are other women's agency providers are also concerned about. So that's kind of like on our to-do list. I would say, if you ask me what is my agency wanting to do in the next 3 to 5 years, we actually want to create a campus of healthy women's shelter and supportive housing center of excellence down in the downtown East Toronto area, where it'll be a hub of services that is going to reflect the entire continuum of housing from shelter to transitional housing to supportive care. And it will include mental health supports, addictions treatment programming, employment supports, and other social supports, as well as training supports. And we want to create that center of excellence. We need it in the downtown east. We service some of the most high risk neighborhoods in Toronto, including Moss Park, Regent Park, and St. Jamestown. And this will be kind of a thriving center for women to come to get the resources and supports they need.
Wow, that's so beautiful. As you're speaking, I'm just envisioning it, putting it all together in my brain. That'd be so beautiful. So, so,
We're
so beautiful.
excited. And we want to
Yeah.
reach out to all the other women's agencies around us because we have a lot of friends, like agency friends, who serve women as well and connect them and just create this whole satellite network of a system
Mhm.
of women's providers who are connected and who are showing this collective strength in wanting to specialize in supporting women who need help.
Awesome. Oh, getting goosebumps. Awesome. So let me ask you this now. How do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada? Give it to me straight.
Give it to you straight. Um, I think that I think that the future of social impact, I think that the future of social impact is very promising because um, there is a sense of, um, I think that there is this growing sense that we all have some level of responsibility above and beyond our own families and our own personal networks. I think what we need to do is really tap into that and really highlight it more broadly. This is more than just social enterprises and innovations. This is about a collective sense of responsibility. It's about changing and altering your set of values, right? And I think that the promise is there. I think that is where growth can continue to happen and evolve. And I think the work that your group does in raising awareness, having these conversations, spotlighting why social good is a collective good, right? I think that's the promise. I think right now, though, in terms of where governments are moving, um, it's um, it's a little bit worrisome, public policy versus social good. I mean, the two cannot be disconnected from each other. And I think we all have to recognize that, and we all have to recognize that part of doing social good is going to have to involve advocacy and urging political leaders and decision makers to make the right policy choices in terms of social policies for people in need. So I guess that's kind of my view on what I think about the future of social impact. I think there's a lot of promise. I think it's still untapped, but I think it's not so much that we're wanting to not do anything about it. I just don't think we've fully explored all that opportunity of being able to get everyone in on the deal around social impact.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I have hope for it because you know what? It's like I always say this almost in every interview I do is that, we're planting seeds and it's really the next generation. We will leave, we'll pass the baton, it'll keep going generation after generation. But it's the seed that we plant and make sure that it's in nourishing soil so that it can grow and prosper so that more seeds can drop and on it goes. So I am hopeful and I'm hopeful in humanity because of the new generation and how they are. They don't take any nonsense. And I'm seeing I'm
Yeah.
seeing, yeah, yeah, any issue it comes up right away. So I'm hopeful for that and really combating a lot of this disparities within social justice. So
I
I agree.
agree. I'm with you. Like it's almost laughable sometimes when I get like emails, even though I have like a ton of emails I have to crawl through. The minute I see like a group of high school students who want to do some good in our agency or want to volunteer or raise funds for us, I like will respond so quickly and I respond faster than I respond to like government emails to me sometimes just because it's like, oh my gosh, we're trying to help inform and influence the future minds and getting them to be one of these days, one of these people will be future leaders or politicians. And you never know what, there's just this little act of having them come in and get a tour of your shelter and meet some of
That's
the
right.
clients or, come and cook a Thanksgiving lunch. You don't know how that might transform their life and make them see things differently. It's just that idea of like it's almost like now also on top of the social justice piece, it's like you also have a duty to help shape and inform and influence the next generation and just like broaden their horizons a little bit, even if they don't want to hear what you have to say, because sometimes they don't want to hear what you have to say, but just let them know the other things are out there, right?
That's
There's more
right.
things to life than just earning money or, even buying a house. Like, hey, helping other
Absolutely.
people is a nice thing to do sometimes, right?
Absolutely. 100%. Wow. So you know what? This has been so impactful. We're gonna leave it as you give us your closing thoughts and your calls to action, forward moving, on how to get some, get some solutions to these problems, and you know, to really make an impact.
Yeah.
So please leave us your closing thoughts and calls to action.
So here's the thing. I've been sitting in a lot of advocacy tables and a lot of meetings lately and going to a lot of conferences. And I'll say something that's more time sensitive than anything else. We're right now, here in Canada, there's policy windows opening up because we know that there's going to be an election soon happening at the Fed. We know there's going to be an election happening soon on Ontario. There's several elections already across Canada at the provincial level. And what I would urge people to do is consider having a role in advocacy. Advocacy does not mean that you have to go out and always rally and kind of like stand in front of Queen's Park or Parliament Hill. It just means sending letters, calling your MPP, just or MP or your counselors, and just telling them that you're concerned about things. And I guess that would be the call to action that I would have for everyone is go out, make some noise, express your concerns about the state of the things that worry you in general about society. Because even though it doesn't impact you behind your own home door, what is out there will ultimately impact you, whether you're a taxpayer or someone who cares about, who will be impacted by certain policies. These things will matter. And I won't mention some of the very controversial things that have been happening in Toronto, but believe it or not, it's gonna be worse than you think it's gonna be because it's not as good as they say with some of these policies, right? So I think the call to action is consider advocacy in either its most active form or its mildest form. And in terms of, the future of what's going to happen, consider getting engaged. Every little bit of effort you make, believe that it does have an impact. I know that maybe the conversation we had today sounded a bit despairing, and I didn't mean for it to sound so hopeless. It isn't, because small agencies such as ourselves and other agencies, when we touch the life of one woman or one individual who needs help, it just takes that one person and they're able to go off and kind of lead a more successful and thriving life. That is a change that we've made, and that is one little step forward, and we just have to keep making incremental steps forward. So, contribute your time, fundraise, donate, call them up and see if you can give in-kind donations of clothing or food or whatever. Just get into the habit of feeling like you can contribute and do good. One little act is, yes, it's a little act, but cumulatively, they all have an impact. So those are my final words.
Very powerful. Yes, and that's the thing. We want to keep it real,
Yeah,
but we're not trying to say doom and gloom. No, you know what I mean? There's always hope, and we should never give up on hope. But we definitely want to, we need to know, right? So that we could make the changes necessary. Yeah.
for sure. I mean, my
So
agency must have served tens of thousands of women in our 60-year history, and many of them have gone on to get their own houses, live a
awesome.
successful life, have families, have jobs, have grandchildren. I mean, little acts make
Amazing.
a difference ultimately. So
That's it.
don't
That's it.
despair, have hope, as you say.
That's right. Wow, this has been so, so, so amazing. We really appreciate your time, your leadership, And we'll definitely collaborate. As I said, we have some panels coming up
Awesome.
we'd love for you to speak on. So we'll definitely be in touch. So Dr. Siu Mee Cheng, we thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you so much for listening to me, and I really appreciate the time to hear some of our concerns, but also our aspirations and hopes. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. So we will close the way that we began this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, we'll be in touch, and thanks again for everything.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Take care, dear. Bye bye.